The last streaks of sunlight barely filtered through the pine canopy as Ben Parsons drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, frowning at the faded map on the passenger seat. He'd meant to be out of these back roads an hour ago, but a detour for construction and a badly timed coffee stop had him racing the dark somewhere on the edge of the state forest, where the asphalt twisted itself into a knot and cell service blinked in and out like a dying firefly. He tapped his phone, but the screen offered only a spinning compass and a blue dot hovering in a sea of green. The GPS had insisted there was a shortcut, a thin gray line crossing the woods, slicing 15 miles off his route home. Ben wasn't a nervous man, but even he knew these places held their own rules. Still, the thought of sleeping in his own bed tonight, not the bench seat of his battered truck, made the risk feel small. He turned off the main road onto the suggested path, tires crunching over gravel as a pair of battered signs loomed up: "County maintenance ends, and use at your own risk." He laughed, a brittle sound swallowed by the trees. Yeah, I get it. Don't blame the county if I end up in a ditch." The radio had lost its signal 10 miles ago, so Ben sang tunelessly to himself, filling the cab with a sound less hollow than the silence. The gravel narrowed into dirt, ruts twisting between ancient oaks and pine. Soon the road was little more than a pair of muddy tracks, overgrown in places, the center brush high enough to thump the undercarriage. The forest pressed close, the air damp with the musk of leaf mold and distant rain. Shadows stretched long and thin, swallowing the last hints of daylight. A sense of unease crept in. The dashboard clock seemed to jump forward 10 minutes in a blink. The radio flickered to life for an instant, snatches of static, a voice whispering words he couldn't quite catch, then fell silent again. Ben shook his head, blaming fatigue. He'd driven at night plenty of times, but tonight the darkness had a strange density, as if the trees themselves leaned closer, hungry to see who had wandered in. He watched for familiar landmarks, but each bend looked the same. Each hollow mirrored the last. Once he spotted a faded red ribbon tied around a branch, then another, farther down, though he couldn't remember passing the first twice. The road forked unexpectedly, and the map was no help. The lines blurred together in a way that made his eyes hurt. He chose left, figuring the compass would swing north, but the needle spun uselessly. The shortcut grew bumpier, rocks scraping the axles, branches dragging along the windows. Ben slowed, window down, listening for the sound of water or distant traffic, anything but the whisper of wind and the hush of pine needles. A shape darted across the path, maybe a fox, maybe just a trick of the shadows. He pressed on, hoping for the main road to appear around the next bend, but the forest only thickened. Every so often, he glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind him, but the only thing following was a deepening gloom. After a mile, the path all but vanished under a carpet of leaves. He hesitated, considered backing up, but the way behind looked less familiar now than the road ahead. The forest pressed closer, trees so dense they blocked out the moon, casting everything in a blue-black hush. He stopped the truck and got out, boots squelching in the moss. The silence outside was immense, a living, breathing thing that seemed to listen. He pulled out his phone, holding it up for a signal, but the screen stayed blank. The air was cool and damp, smelling of loam, and something sharper, almost metallic. Ben considered turning back, but which way? He walked a few steps ahead, crunching leaves underfoot, scanning the trees for any sign of where the road picked up again. He found a tree with a deep gouge in the bark, 3 parallel scratches, old but not ancient, sap crusted dark along the wound. Nearby, a strip of faded cloth hung from a twig, snapping softly in the breeze. A branch snapped behind him. He spun, heart jumping. Nothing but shadows. He called out, "Hello," but his voice fell flat, swallowed by the woods. For a moment he imagined laughter, distant and thin, but it faded as quickly as it came. Ben returned to the truck, nerves prickling. He tried to retrace his route, but after only a few minutes, the path forked again, 2 tracks disappearing into darkness. He picked the one that looked less overgrown, only to realize a quarter-mile later he'd circled back to the same tree with the gouged bark. He pressed the brakes, headlights illuminating a wall of brambles where the road should have been. Panic flickered in his chest. He reversed, tires spinning, but the path behind had vanished. No muddy ruts, no tire marks, just a seamless carpet of leaves. It made no sense. As he sat in the cab, staring out at the woods pressing on all sides, Ben felt the first true edge of fear. Somewhere deep in the branches, an owl called, but otherwise the forest was silent. The road he'd followed swallowed up, as if it had never existed at all. Ben kept the engine running, its hum a fragile thread between himself and the encroaching dark. The headlights carved out a trembling tunnel through the trees, but everything outside their glow felt impossibly vast and indifferent. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened, forcing his breath to slow. He tried to convince himself there was a rational answer. Maybe he'd missed a turn, or the path had washed out in the last storm. It had to be something simple, something human. He rolled the window down, listening for distant road noise, hoping for the faint whine of passing cars, the rhythmic slap of tires on pavement. All he heard was the engine, and the soft secret shifting of the forest. Once he thought he caught a flicker of light through the trees, but when he craned to see, it was gone, leaving only darkness layered upon darkness. Ben reached for his phone again. Still nothing. The battery icon glowed red, mocking him. He set it aside and pulled the map from the seat, smoothing its creased paper across his lap. The little gray lines had always felt comforting, proof that someone else had traveled these roads before. Now they blurred together, the ink running as if the forest itself was seeping through the paper. He could barely match his last known position to any feature in front of him. The shortcut wasn't just hard to find, it felt as though it was actively shifting away from him. He tried to backtrack, turning the truck around with painstaking care, headlights now raking across fresh shadows. Every twist of the wheel felt wrong, the ground beneath his tires soft and uncertain. He passed the gouged tree again, but now there were 2 side by side, both marked as if warning him that the woods had changed their mind about letting him pass. He drove slowly, windows fogging, mind counting every passing second. The light faded fast, sinking the world into an unnatural twilight. He passed a rotting log he was sure he hadn't seen before. A flock of crows scattered as he approached, their wings black against the thickening dusk. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a branch snapped with the sound of something heavy moving just out of sight. The dashboard clock blinked 7:12, though he could have sworn it was nearly 9. His watch ticked out of rhythm with the truck's clock, the hands creeping slow and fast in alternating fits. He pressed on, scanning for any break in the trees, any glimmer of moonlight on pavement or gravel. Soon the dirt path forked again, this time with 3 narrow trails vanishing into brush. None of them looked right. He stopped, engine idling, and stepped out, heart hammering. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, and something musky and wild. He walked a few paces down the first path, just enough for the truck's taillights to vanish behind tangled branches, then doubled back, suddenly afraid he wouldn't find his way even that short distance. He tried the second path, but it curved sharply and faded into a thicket of brambles. The third ran downhill, past a mossy boulder, before vanishing into fog. Ben stood at the crossroads, the silence swelling in his ears. For a heartbeat, he heard what sounded like a distant voice calling his name, a whisper that slid between the trees and was gone. Unease pricked at him. He was a rational man, but he'd been in the woods long enough to respect them. He walked the edge of each path, searching for tire tracks or footprints. Instead, he found the rusted skeleton of a bicycle, half buried in leaves. its frame twisted by years of rain and rot. A little farther on, a tattered scarf hung from a branch, faded blue with a white stripe, snapping in a breeze that didn't reach his skin. He stumbled back to his truck, locking the doors, and resting his head against the steering wheel. He considered blasting the horn, but something in the hush of the woods made him think better of it. He was no longer convinced that drawing attention was wise. He decided to wait for daylight, hoping things would look different in the sun. He killed the engine, saving what little fuel he had left, and wrapped himself in an old blanket from the back seat. His eyes refused to close. Shadows pooled in the corners of the cab, and once, when he looked up, he swore he saw a face peering at him from the trees, a face pale and blurred, as if remembered from a nightmare. He blinked, and it was gone. Time dragged. His thoughts spun in circles, chasing explanations. Was there an old service road he'd missed? Some kind of forest maintenance project that rerouted traffic? Had he just lost his nerve? But the woods pressed closer as darkness deepened, the world shrinking to the tiny space inside the truck. Ben thought about the bike, the scarf, the way the roads had shifted and multiplied. Somewhere, a far-off owl called once, twice, then fell silent. Ben shivered, certain now that the shortcut had led him somewhere he wasn't meant to be, and that the forest had no intention of letting him find the road again. Ben drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, wrapped in his blanket, every creak of the cooling engine and scrape of wind in the branches jarring him awake. The darkness inside the cab felt thick, suffocating, so he cracked the window just enough to let in the chill and the damp smell of the forest. Somewhere out there, leaves shifted under the weight of something moving, maybe a deer, maybe just the old woods settling for the night. But Ben's nerves had grown raw, every sense sharpened to the edge of panic. Dreams nipped at him whenever his eyes closed, snatches of wandering through tangled trees, the sense of running in circles, faces watching from between the trunks. He dreamed of the tattered scarf, snapping in wind, of hands reaching out from moss and shadows. Once, he jolted awake convinced he'd heard someone calling his name from the darkness. Ben, Ben, only to find himself alone but for the endless chorus of crickets. When dawn finally seeped into the world, it was gray and slow. The forest looked the same, silent, close, unchanged. He tried his phone again, no bars, and now the battery was dead, leaving him more cut off than ever. He climbed out, stretching stiff limbs, and tried to make sense of his bearings. The crossroads where he'd stopped had vanished, replaced by a single narrow track curling away into mist. He packed a small backpack, with water, a few protein bars, and his flashlight. He left a note on the dashboard, just in case. Lost in woods, went looking for help. Name is Ben Parsons, and locked up behind him. With each step away from the truck, he checked back, watching its form fade behind curtains of green, half afraid it would disappear the moment he looked away. He tried to mark his route, breaking small branches, dragging a stick through the dirt, but after 20 minutes, he glanced behind him, and saw no sign of broken twigs, no scuffed earth, just an unblemished carpet of last year's leaves. Panic simmered, but he forced it down, and pressed on, listening to the wood's endless silence. As he walked, Ben found hints that he wasn't the first to be lost here. The bicycle, now glimpsed from a different angle, nearly covered by roots, as if the ground was reclaiming it. A cracked pair of glasses, resting atop a stump. A child's shoe, bright red, abandoned beside a tree, marked with those same 3 deep scratches. He shivered, his mind whispering stories of others who'd wandered too far and never returned. The woods grew stranger as the sun climbed. The shadows didn't move the way they should. Sometimes it seemed the light was coming from the wrong direction, casting his shadow in front and behind at once. He tried to keep track of the sun, but it slipped behind clouds and trees, the morning never growing any brighter. Ben called out now and then, shouting his own name, calling for help, but the sound fell flat, swallowed by the moss and bark. Once he heard a voice call back, faint and echoing, but when he followed it, he found only an old campsite, a rusted coffee pot, a circle of stones, a weathered backpack, half buried in earth. Inside was a moldy, water-damaged notebook. Most of the pages had dissolved into pulp, but on the inside cover, a scrawled message remained. If you see the lights, don't follow them. If you hear your own voice, run. He closed the pack, throat tight, and stumbled on. The hunger grew sharper, his water running low, his mouth dry as bark. Several times he returned, inexplicably, to the same clearing, the mossy boulder, the blue scarf, now hanging limp in the still air. No matter which direction he chose, the forest seemed to turn him around, circling him back to the beginning. By mid-afternoon, desperation pushed him to try the thick undergrowth, abandoning all thought of trails or logic. Branches tore at his arms, mud sucked at his boots. The world grew quieter, even the birds falling silent. It felt as if something in the forest was holding its breath, waiting. Then he heard it, a low whisper, not wind, but words threading through the trees. Then, it was his own voice, pitched low and plaintive. His heart froze. He ducked behind a trunk, breath shallow, every story he'd ever heard about haunted woods flooding his mind. Shadows moved at the corner of his vision, eyes glinting in the gloom, shapes too tall and thin to be human weaving between the trunks. In the far distance, pale lights flickered, weaving an invitation deeper into the woods. Ben shut his eyes, remembering the note in the ruined notebook. Don't follow the lights, don't trust your own voice. The day waned, but the darkness beneath the trees seemed to deepen instead of lifting. Ben hunched against a fallen log, exhaustion making his mind swim, the certainty growing in his gut that the shortcut had become a trap, one laid long ago, waiting for the lost, the desperate, and the unwary. And now it was his turn. Ben huddled behind the fallen log, breath held tight in his throat, while the forest pressed in with an ancient patience. For a long time, he didn't move, didn't even dare to peek over the mossy trunk. The faint lights drifted through the undergrowth, will-o'-the-wisps, maybe, or just the tricks of a tired mind, shifting and pulsing, beckoning deeper with a cold, steady rhythm. Now and then, he heard the echo of his own name, soft as a lullaby, calling from nowhere and everywhere at once. His fingers dug into the bark, grounding himself. He replayed the notebook's warning in his mind. If you see the lights, don't follow them. If you hear your own voice, run. He wondered how many people had sat in these woods, with the same fear gnawing at their insides. How many had given in to curiosity or panic, and stepped off the edge of reason. When the lights faded, and the voices fell silent, Ben forced himself to move. He chose the direction opposite the last glimmer, pressing deeper through tangled roots and ferns. His feet ached, stomach twisting with hunger and thirst. With every step, the woods felt older, more deliberate, tree trunks impossibly thick, their bark etched with swirling marks, and strange looping symbols he couldn't decipher. In a hollow where the light barely reached, he stumbled on a circle of stones, too round, too perfect to be natural. At its center, a tree grew twisted and black, branches bare despite the season. All around it, offerings were scattered, scraps of cloth, buttons, old coins, dulled by moss. A sense of dread swept over him, and he skirted the clearing wide, refusing to meet the hollow's silent invitation. Memories fluttered, stories he'd heard as a boy, warnings about places that didn't want to be found, woods that stole the names of travelers who trespassed at the wrong hour. Some said these places could bargain, that if you gave the right thing, a secret, a memory, a piece of yourself, they might let you leave. Ben scoffed, but the thought clung to him like dew. As he pushed forward, the woods thickened again. Branches snagged his clothes and scratched his skin. leaving red marks that burned with an unfamiliar chill. Every so often, he glimpsed other signs of the lost, a boot half buried in loam, initials carved deep into a trunk, a rusty pocket knife wedged in a root. He began to wonder if he'd always been here, if the world beyond the trees had ever really existed. Then, as the afternoon faded toward dusk, Ben heard the crunch of footsteps that weren't his own. He spun, heart racing, and glimpsed a figure through the trees, tall, thin, wrapped in shadows. The face was indistinct, features shifting in the dimness, but it radiated an unsettling familiarity, as if the woods had built it from scraps of his own memories. He called out, voice trembling, "Hello, please, I'm lost. Can you help me?" The figure tilted its head, eyes glinting like the distant lights. It spoke, voice thin and warped. "You took a shortcut. There is no road here, only the old ways, only bargains." Ben stepped closer, hope flickering. "I just want to go home. I just want to find the road again." The figure's mouth bent in a smile, too wide, too hungry. "Everything here is trade. What will you give to leave?" His mind raced. He had nothing left but a battered pack, his dying phone, and memories of a world growing less real with every passing hour. The figure stepped aside, revealing a faint trail, barely more than a gap in the trees, running toward a thicket where the light burned faintly gold. "Choose," the figure said. "You can stay, wander until you are hollow, or you can leave something behind and walk the old path out." Ben's hands shook. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around his wallet. A photo slipped out, his parents, long gone, smiling by a riverside. For a moment he considered it. Was this the price, or was the bargain something deeper? The woods seemed to hold their breath. The figure waited, as patient as the forest itself. Finally Ben whispered, "I'll give you my memory of this place. Every nightmare, every lost hour, every fear. Let me go, and I won't look back." The figure's eyes narrowed. For a moment it flickered and stretched, becoming a dozen lost faces, all pleading or warning. Then it nodded. "Walk, and don't ever return. The woods remember, even if you don't." Ben stepped onto the faint trail, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. As he walked, the trees thinned, the air brightened, and a path of gold light unspooled before him. He never looked back, not once, afraid of what might be following. And somewhere behind him, the forest closed like a door, erasing every trace of his passing, except for a name whispered by the trees, and the memory he'd left behind. The forest's edge seemed to shimmer in the distance, a fragile veil between the ancient woods and the world beyond. Ben's legs burned with exhaustion, his breath ragged in the crisp air as he stumbled toward the faint glow filtering through the trees. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the memories he'd traded away, the fears, the hours lost, the whispers that had chased him through shadow and fog. As the golden light grew stronger, he emerged from the thicket into a clearing, bathed in the soft hues of dusk. The road stretched out before him, not the narrow dirt path he'd followed, but a wide, worn asphalt ribbon, slick with rain and flecked with fallen leaves. It curved gently toward a distant highway, where headlights blinked like stars against the gathering dark. Ben's heart leapt, relief surged through him, mingling with disbelief. The shortcut had led him back, not where he'd expected, but out nonetheless. He stumbled forward, every instinct urging him to keep moving, to leave the forest's grasp behind for good. He paused by the roadside, catching his breath. A weathered sign creaked in the breeze. "Welcome to Brookhaven." He squinted at the peeling paint, the faded letters, tugging at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a whisper told him this town was a place he'd known long ago, a home he might have forgotten. Ben reached into his pocket and found the photo he'd left behind in the forest, a worn picture of his parents, edges curled with age. He traced their faces with trembling fingers, then let it fall to the wet earth. The wind caught the paper and carried it away, folding it into a fluttering dance of leaves. He looked down the road and saw a figure standing by the roadside, a woman wrapped in a long coat, her face pale and framed by dark hair. She waved a tired hand, beckoning him closer. As he approached, her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, he felt a jolt of recognition, like seeing a ghost or a forgotten dream. "Welcome back," she said softly, voice carrying the weight of years. "We've been waiting." Ben blinked, confusion clouding his mind. Waiting for what? She smiled, a sad, knowing curve of lips. "For you to remember." Behind her, a small gathering had formed. Faces both young and old, some smiling, others solemn. They were the ones who had vanished into the woods before him, travelers lost to the forest's secret paths. Now they stood here, between two worlds, caught in the delicate balance of memory and oblivion. One of the elders stepped forward, holding out a weathered journal. "Your story is part of ours now," he said. "Every soul who walks the old ways leaves a mark, a tale to guide those who come after." Ben took the journal, fingers trembling, as he opened the brittle pages. Inside were stories, handwritten accounts of wanderers like himself, their hopes, their regrets, their bargains with the forest. His own name was there, etched in faded ink, alongside a drawing of a twisted tree marked with 3 deep scratches. The woman watched him closely. "The forest doesn't forget," she said, "but it also doesn't want to lose its own. You escaped, but a piece of you remains." Ben swallowed hard. "What happens to those who stay?" She gestured toward the trees. "They become part of the story, guardians of the old paths, watching, waiting, guiding, or warning the next lost soul." The sky darkened, stars pricking through the fading light. Ben closed the journal, a new resolve settling over him. He knew he couldn't forget, not truly, but he could live with the memory, carry it as a warning and a gift. As he turned to leave, the crowd began to fade like mist, their forms dissolving into the night air. The woman's voice followed him softly, a benediction carried on the breeze. "Be careful which paths you take, Ben. The woods remember." He stepped onto the highway, heart steadying, as the roar of passing cars filled the night. The shortcut was behind him now, a secret folded deep in the roots and shadows. But as he looked back one last time, he thought he saw a flicker of light, distant and flickering, among the trees, and somewhere, the forest whispered his name. The highway stretched ahead, a ribbon of black cutting through the dense forest like a wound. James Carter gripped the steering wheel tightly, eyes flicking between the dim glow of the dashboard and the dark road that vanished into the night. The clock on the dash read 11:47 p.m., but the thick gray fog that had crept in over the last few miles made it feel as if time had folded in on itself. He squinted through the windshield, trying to pierce the mist, but the headlights seemed to dissolve into a swirling, almost viscous haze. At first, James thought it was just ordinary fog, a heavy mist that had settled in after the evening's rain. He slowed the truck, his right foot easing off the accelerator, and reached out to adjust the wipers, which barely helped clear the moisture clinging to the glass. The radio crackled softly, but the signal was weak, mostly static, punctuated by distant, indistinct voices that seemed to come and go with the shifting fog. The air inside the cab was cold and damp, as if the fog had seeped through the seals and settled around him like a shroud. James shivered, rubbing his arms, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. He had driven this stretch dozens of times before, but tonight the road felt different, as if it were alive and watching. As he drove deeper into the fog, the usual sounds of the night disappeared. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant howl of a coyote. Even the hum of his engine seemed muted, swallowed by the thick silence. James flicked on the high beams, hoping to cut through the mist, but the light reflected back at him, turning the fog into a wall of ghostly white. Then something caught his eye. Just ahead, the asphalt under his headlights seemed to ripple gently, like the surface of a disturbed pond. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, or his tired eyes playing tricks on him. But the sensation was undeniable. The road pulsed softly, rising and falling in slow rhythmic waves, as if it were breathing. James's heart quickened. He gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady his nerves. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing closer to the cab, swirling around the truck in slow eddies. The air smelled different, less like damp earth, and more metallic, like something ancient and sharp lurking just beneath the surface. He glanced in his side mirrors. The trees flanking the road were shadowy and indistinct, their trunks shifting subtly, as if breathing alongside the road. The branches swayed despite the stillness of the air around him. The fog dampened sound, but through the mist, James thought he heard faint, muffled breathing, slow and deep, coming from the very road beneath his tires. Panic prickled at the edges of his mind. He reached for the CB radio, fingers trembling. Breaker 19, this is Red Line 23. Anyone out there? Come back. His voice sounded small and fragile in the enclosed cab. The radio responded with static and a faint, eerie whisper, "Keep moving. Don't stop." James's breath caught. The voice was barely audible, like a secret carried on the wind, but unmistakably human. He spun the dial, hoping for a stronger signal, but the crackle was relentless. His cell phone was dead. No bars, no signal, no connection to the world beyond this fog. The road's pulsing grew stronger beneath him, and the truck's tires seemed to sink slightly into the surface, as if the asphalt were softening. James tried to steady the wheel as the truck jolted, the vibration coursing up through the chassis and into his bones. Outside, shadows flickered and twisted in the fog, elongated shapes that darted just beyond the reach of his headlights, disappearing before he could focus on them. He pressed the accelerator, desperate to outrun the suffocating mist, but the truck responded sluggishly, as if the road itself resisted his escape. The muffled breathing grew louder, now accompanied by a low rhythmic thudding that seemed to sync with the pulsing pavement. James swallowed hard, heart pounding in his chest. He scanned the roadside for signs, mile markers, anything familiar, but the fog erased all landmarks. The trees on either side appeared to bend inward, their branches clawing toward the sky like grasping fingers. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a living thing that breathed and watched. A sudden flicker caught his eye, a flash of movement reflected in the rear-view mirror. He spun his head around but saw only the blank swirling fog. Then the radio crackled again, clearer this time. "Don't look back, it sees you." A cold shiver ran down James's spine. His hands trembled as he gripped the wheel, sweat beading on his forehead. Despite the chill, the truck's headlights dimmed momentarily, casting the cab into near darkness before flickering back to life. The road beneath him rose and fell with increasing intensity, the surface writhing like a living creature. The breathing grew louder, faster, more urgent. James fought to keep control, eyes wide and fixed on the wavering path ahead. Suddenly, a shape loomed in the fog, a towering figure silhouetted against the mist, impossibly tall and impossibly still. James slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the slick asphalt as the figure seemed to pulse with the same rhythmic breathing as the road. Frozen with terror, James watched as the shape dissolved back into the fog, leaving behind only the echo of its presence. The radio hissed one last message before going silent. "You can't escape." James's grip tightened, his knuckles white. The fog closed in tighter, and the road beneath him continued its slow, dreadful breathing, as if alive and waiting for him to surrender to the mist. The fog wrapped tighter around James as he pressed onward. The world outside the truck reduced to a gray blur that swallowed headlights whole. The rhythmic pulsing of the road beneath his tires had intensified into a steady, unsettling throb, vibrating through the chassis and into his bones. It was as though the very ground was alive, breathing slowly, deliberately, in time with his own escalating heartbeat. James tried to focus on the gauges, seeking some logical cause for the sensations overwhelming him. The speedometer wavered between 40 and 50 miles per hour, but the engine sounded strained, sluggish, as if fighting against an invisible resistance. His tires pressed into the asphalt, but the surface felt soft, almost organic, yielding beneath him like damp earth. A sudden jolt shook the truck, and James slammed a hand on the dashboard, eyes wide. The steering wobbled beneath his grip, as if the road itself had grown uneven or spongy. Outside, the shapes beside the highway stretched and shifted, trees bending in impossible arcs, branches writhing like serpents. The fog thickened further, muting sound until the only audible thing was the deep, slow breathing that seemed to emanate from the road itself. Desperation prickled at James's skin. He flipped the CB radio back on, fingers trembling. Breaker 19. This is Redline 23. Does anyone copy? I'm stuck on Highway 47, near mile marker 22. Emergency, please respond. Only static answered, swirling with faint, unintelligible whispers that rose and fell like ghostly tides. His cell phone remained dark, screen dead from no signal and drained battery. James cursed under his breath, realizing he was utterly cut off from the world. As he gripped the wheel, the road beneath the tires rippled again, sending subtle waves through the truck's frame. His eyes flicked to the side mirrors, catching fleeting glimpses of something darting at the edge of the fog. A shadowy figure, quick and silent. It vanished whenever he turned his head fully, leaving only the mist and the heavy breathing sound behind. The truck's radio hissed again, this time clearer but no less chilling. The road feeds on fear, don't give it yours. James's pulse slammed in his ears. His hands shook as he swerved slightly, trying to keep the truck steady. The fog seemed to contract and swell in sync with the pulsing road, closing in tighter with every breath. He strained to see, eyes scanning for familiar landmarks, signs, anything to anchor him. But the landscape twisted and blurred, objects warping in impossible ways. Roadside signs bent backward, trees duplicated themselves in the mist, like reflections in fractured glass. His own reflection caught in the rearview mirror startled him. Pale, wide-eyed, lips pressed tight in tension, the truck's cab filled with an eerie silence, punctuated only by the soft thuds of his heartbeat and the rising breath of the asphalt beneath. A sudden sensation of sinking overwhelmed him as the truck's tires seemed to dip slightly into the road, like treading on a thick sponge. The steering grew heavier, less responsive. James fought the urge to panic, hands tightening on the wheel, muscles trembling. In the fog, he noticed movement again, shapes emerging just beyond his peripheral vision. They weren't quite human, limbs elongated, faces blurred beyond recognition. Once they appeared reflected in the windows, their presence looming close but intangible. Whispered voices threaded through the static, half words, warnings, names. They sounded distant, echoing in a cavernous space. James swallowed hard, heart pounding. He tried to call out, voice shaking, "Who's there? What do you want?" No answer came, only the relentless breathing of the road, rising and falling, pulsing beneath his tires. Suddenly the fog closed in so thick that James could barely see the dashboard. His headlight beams fractured into halos of pale light that dissolved quickly. The radio burst into frantic static, then a piercing shriek, a sound like metal scraping bone, echoed in the cab. He slammed on the brakes, the truck lurching forward, despite his efforts. The road ahead rippled violently, the asphalt folding and bending like living skin. James struggled to maintain control, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, eyes darting. Then, through the haze, a figure appeared directly in the center of the lane, a tall silhouette, impossibly thin, its form shifting as if made of smoke and shadows. James slammed the horn and swerved, but the figure remained, growing closer with every passing second. His breath caught as the silhouette's outline blurred and pulsed, matching the heartbeat of the breathing road. Desperation fueled his actions. He floored the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest as the truck surged forward, but the pulsing beneath seemed to resist, slowing his progress. The fog thickened again, swallowing the road behind him. Through the side window, James glimpsed more figures emerging, twisted shapes dancing at the edge of visibility, circling like predators. The radio burst to life once more, voice low and urgent. "Don't stop, keep moving, or you become part of the road." James gritted his teeth, eyes fixed ahead, refusing to let fear take hold. He drove faster, the truck bucking and straining as the fog and breathing road closed in. The pounding beneath became a deafening roar. The world warped and stretched, time fracturing, and still the road breathed, alive, hungry, and unwilling to let him go. The fog had thickened into a suffocating wall. By the time James realized he had lost all sense of direction, every tree, every shadow, every whispering gust of wind seemed to meld into an endless maze of gray and black. His hands were clenched so tightly on the steering wheel that his knuckles had turned white, and the hum of the engine was now a distant murmur beneath the unnerving rhythmic pulse of the road. The surface beneath his tires no longer felt like asphalt. It had become pliant, almost breathing beneath him, rising and falling in subtle waves that sent shivers through the cab. His tires sank slightly with each pulse, like stepping into water too deep to wade. It was as if the very road was alive, watching, waiting, perhaps even feeding. James glanced to the side mirrors, and saw nothing but swirling fog in the dark, twisting forms of trees that seemed to loom closer with every passing second. Then, out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement caught his attention, a shadowy figure darting among the trees, swift and silent. He jerked his head around to catch a better look, but it vanished into the mist like smoke. His breath quickened as distant whispers fluttered through the radio static, fragmented voices, indecipherable yet chilling. The faint murmur of a woman's voice, a child's laughter, the low growl of something unidentifiable floated just beyond the edge of hearing. James reached for the CB mic, voice trembling. "This is Redline 23. If anyone's out there, please respond. I'm stuck near mile marker 22. Highway 47. Static hissed in reply, then a whisper barely audible. "Keep moving. Don't stop. It's hungry." A cold knot of dread tightened in James's stomach. He gripped the wheel tighter, willing himself to stay calm. But the cab began to vibrate with the road's slow, pulsing breath, and the fog closed in further, thickening until the headlights barely pierced its veil. Time lost all meaning. The dashboard clock blinked erratically, seconds stretching and snapping back like a broken metronome. The world outside twisted, roadside signs bent into impossible curves, and trees duplicated and shifted as if the forest itself was breathing with him. James's eyes darted frantically, searching for a landmark, any sign of normalcy, but everything looked warped and alien. The muffled breathing beneath his feet grew louder, accompanied now by a low, rhythmic thudding that reverberated through the truck's frame. His skin prickled with fear when a shape emerged ahead, faint but unmistakable, a towering silhouette, shifting and flickering with the same rhythmic pulse as the road. Heart pounding, James slammed on the brakes, but the figure did not retreat. Instead, it seemed to pulse in sync with the breathing asphalt, an extension of the living road itself. Panicking, James swerved violently, tires skidding against the slick surface. The figure dissolved back into the fog, replaced by more shadows, elongated, distorted forms that danced at the edges of his vision, disappearing whenever he looked directly at them. The radio crackled again, voice warped and desperate. "You can't escape. The road remembers." James's breathing grew ragged as he fought to keep the truck steady. The fog thickened to an impenetrable curtain, swallowing everything around him. The thudding beneath became a roar, drowning out his engine's sputter and the panicked pounding of his heart. In that engulfing silence, James felt the road pulse one last time, deeper, stronger, alive, and then everything went black. The darkness inside the cab was absolute, swallowed whole by the impenetrable fog, pressing in from all sides. James Carter's breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale a ghostly mist mingling with the damp chill that had settled in the truck's cramped interior. The pulse beneath him, steady and unrelenting, vibrated through every inch of the vehicle, a living heartbeat beneath cold, unyielding asphalt. His hands, still clenched white on the steering wheel, trembled as the headlights flickered and dimmed, casting the interior into intermittent shadow. The fog outside pressed against the glass, like fingers seeking purchase, distorting shapes beyond recognition. Then, a new sensation stirred in the air, a low, rumbling vibration that swelled into an ominous thudding, echoing deep inside his skull. James's mind scrambled, torn between flight and frozen paralysis. The radio crackled to life with static, and then a voice, slow, distorted, but unmistakable. It didn't come through as a clear message, but as waves of sensation, a language not spoken, but felt, pressing against his consciousness like a tide. The voice seemed to speak directly into his bones, a cold whisper beneath the roar. "You belong here." Suddenly, the road beneath his tires shifted violently. The asphalt rose and fell like the chest of a sleeping giant, convulsing beneath him. The truck lurched, as if caught in the grip of some colossal unseen force. James slammed his hands against the wheel, fighting to maintain control, as the steering pulled violently to the left and then to the right, jerking the cab like a wild beast, refusing restraint. Outside, through the fog, the road seemed to undulate, twisting and folding in impossible ways. The once solid blacktop cracked open in places, revealing depths filled with roiling shadows and something faintly luminescent that writhed beneath the surface. It was as if the earth itself had become a living entity, breathing and writhing, hungry for more. A form emerged from the mist, a towering figure, vast and shifting, constructed from swirling fog and fractured pavement. It stretched upward beyond the reach of James's headlights, an amalgamation of road and shadow, with glowing fissures pulsing like veins filled with molten light. The thing moved slowly, deliberately, exuding a malevolent intelligence. James's heart pounded in his chest as the monstrous entity's voice boomed inside his head, a twisted echo of the radio's cryptic whispers. "You took what wasn't yours. Now, you pay the toll." Visions flooded his mind. Accidents on this cursed stretch, vehicles crushed and broken, desperate faces frozen in terror, the endless spiral of lost souls trapped in the road's grasp. He saw himself among them, helpless and consumed. Summoning every ounce of will, James yanked the wheel, turning sharply onto a narrow gravel shoulder. The truck skidded, fishtailing as the road bucked and trembled beneath him. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had to escape. He had to break free. The fog thickened into an almost tangible wall, pressing in from all sides. But ahead, a faint glimmer appeared, a narrow path of faint light, breaking through the suffocating mist. It shimmered like a beacon, promising escape. James floored the accelerator, tires clawing for grip on the trembling surface. The breathing beneath grew louder, more frantic, as if enraged by his defiance. The monstrous figure surged forward, cracking the asphalt with each step, its voice a deafening roar. There is no escape. Yet the path beckoned, fragile but real. The truck surged forward, the trembling road giving way to gravel, then dirt. The fog thinned, light spilling over the horizon as the monstrous presence receded with a final, furious roar that shook the night. James's chest heaved with exertion as the truck broke free from the fog's grasp, emerging onto a quiet, familiar highway bathed in the soft glow of early dawn. His hands trembled as the first rays of sun kissed the windshield, chasing away the shadows and the nightmare. But the road behind him was silent, still, and utterly empty. James exhaled slowly, the weight of what he'd faced pressing down but fading with the morning light. He knew this stretch of highway held a secret, a living darkness beneath its surface, a hungry entity that breathed and watched, forever waiting for the next traveler, foolish enough to ignore the toll. And as he drove on, the faintest pulse beneath his tires seemed to echo still, a reminder that some roads are alive, and some journeys never truly end. The first light of dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, casting a pale glow that began to dispel the clinging fog. James Carter's breath fogged in the cool morning air as he sat behind the wheel, the hum of the engine steady now, but the memories of the night's terrors weighing heavily on his mind. He stared out at the empty highway stretching ahead, the asphalt no longer pulsing beneath him, but solid and silent. He exhaled slowly, the tight knot of fear in his chest loosening just a fraction. He'd escaped the breathing road, or so he hoped, but the ordeal had left its mark, not just in the fatigue etched into his bones, but in a creeping, gnawing unease that refused to fade. The fog had lifted almost entirely, revealing the familiar landscape of roadside trees and weathered signs, but something felt off. The mile markers passed without meaning, their numbers jumbled or missing entirely. The distant hum of traffic was replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the whisper of wind through the leaves. James shifted his gaze to the rearview mirror. For a moment he thought he saw a faint shimmer behind him, a ripple in the air where the fog had been. He blinked, and it was gone. As he drove, his thoughts turned to the stories he'd heard, the legends whispered by truckers about cursed roads, places where the earth itself breathed and swallowed souls whole. He dismissed them as folklore, until tonight, until he felt the road's pulse beneath his tires, the whispering voices on the radio, the shadows dancing just beyond sight. His eyes scanned the roadside, and he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A small weathered memorial marker tucked beneath a twisted pine, a faded photograph of a man in a trucker's cap, smiling against a backdrop of endless highway, a name scratched into the wood, Red Line 23. James's hand trembled as he slowed the truck to a stop beside the marker. He reached out, brushing away moss and fallen leaves, and traced the name with a fingertip. The air around him grew heavy, the silence deepening into something that felt alive, watching. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life with static, and then a voice, faint but unmistakably familiar. "You're not alone. The road remembers." James's heart pounded as the voice faded, leaving only the static whispering in his ears. He stared ahead, uncertainty swirling within him like the fog that had once consumed the night. The highway stretched on, endless and unyielding. As he started the engine and pulled back onto the road, a chill wind swept through the cab, carrying with it the faintest echo of breathing beneath the tires, a reminder that some roads never truly release their hold. Hours later, James stopped at a roadside diner, the neon sign flickering above the door. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fried food, a comforting contrast to the night's horrors. As he sipped his coffee, he overheard a group of truckers swapping stories, their voices low and grave. One of them mentioned a stretch of highway known for strange disappearances and whispered warnings. Another spoke of drivers who claimed the road itself was alive, demanding a toll in souls or memories. James listened, the tales sinking deep into his bones. He reached into his pocket and found a crumpled scrap of paper, the note he'd hastily scribbled in the fog, a desperate message in case he didn't make it out. He folded it carefully, tucked it back away, and looked out the window at the dark highway beyond. The sun climbed higher, but James knew some shadows lingered longer than the night. The road might seem quiet now, but beneath its surface, it was still breathing, still watching, still waiting for the next traveler to lose their way. And somewhere, far off in the distance, the faint pulse of life beneath the asphalt echoed once more, steady, relentless, eternal. The sun was slipping below the jagged horizon as Jake Turner guided his rig down the winding canyon road, the fading light casting long shadows across the rocky cliffs. The air was crisp and still, the kind of quiet that pressed in and made every sound sharper. Jake had been on the road for hours hauling a load of timber from the northern forests back to the city. His eyes were heavy, but the beauty of the canyon kept him alert. The rust-red cliffs, the sparse scrub pines clinging to cracks in the rock, the distant cry of a hawk slicing the evening silence. His rig rumbled steadily as he rounded a tight bend near the edge of a steep drop. The narrow road was worn and patched in places, and Jake eased off the throttle, knowing the terrain demanded respect. The canyon stretched out below, a deep scar in the earth, glittering faintly with the reflection of the last light. Suddenly the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The massive rig coasted forward, grinding to a halt mere feet from the guardrail that separated the road from the dizzying drop. Jake's heart leapt in his chest. He hit the ignition again, nothing but a hollow click. He reached for the gear shift, tried the clutch, but the engine refused to turn over. Come on, Jake muttered, pounding the dashboard with a fist. The radio crackled faintly, then went silent. His phone, tucked into the dashboard cradle, showed no signal, no bars, no messages, just the taunting blank screen. The canyon around him was suddenly vast and empty, the fading light swallowed by the deepening dusk. No other vehicles had passed in ages. The wind whispered softly through the rocks, carrying with it a faint chill that crept into Jake's bones. He sighed, threw the truck into neutral, and climbed down from the cab. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he circled the rig, flashlight in hand. The silence felt oppressive, thick with a weight he couldn't place. The fading light painted long shadows beneath the truck, making the chassis loom like a dark cavern. That's when he heard it, a soft rhythmic knocking, tap tap tap, coming from beneath the trailer. Jake froze, flashlight beam cutting through the dark undercarriage. The knocks came again, deliberate and slow, echoing faintly against the rocky canyon walls. His breath hitched as he crouched, peering into the shadows. "Hello," he called, voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to swallow his words. He shook his head, trying to steady his nerves. "Must be an animal," he muttered, though the cadence had been too regular, too purposeful to be random. Jake moved to the side, scanning the rocky embankment below the road. The canyon dropped away steeply, shadows pooling in crevices and hollows. Nothing stirred, only the whisper of wind through the pines. He circled back under the rig, shining his flashlight on the wheels, the axles, the underside of the trailer. Then he spotted something, a small muddy footprint pressed into the soft dirt beneath the chassis. It was too large for any animal he knew, the shape oddly human, with ragged edges, as if made in haste or distress. A shiver ran down his spine. "All right, whoever's out there, I'm coming down," Jake said, voice low but firm. He knelt and peered under the trailer, the beam of his flashlight catching glints of something, metal, maybe, or scraps of fabric tangled in the frame. Another knock echoed, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. He swallowed hard, and reached down to pull himself underneath the rig, the cold dirt pressing against his palms. His headlamp cast eerie shadows on the rocks as he edged forward, each breath coming shallow, and fast. But as he moved further in, the source of the knocking remained unseen. No shapes, no movement, just the hollow sound bouncing off metal and stone. Jake crawled back out, heart pounding, feeling watched, unsettled. He stood, dusting off his hands, and scanned the darkening canyon once more. The road was silent, except for the soft knock again, this time from the far side of the trailer, steady and patient, as if someone, or something, was waiting for him to listen. Jake's instincts screamed to leave, to start walking back toward the last town miles behind. But the rig wouldn't start, and the canyon shadows seemed to grow longer, closer. He climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and sat with his hands trembling on the wheel. Then knock, knock, knock. The sound came again, muffled but unmistakable, emanating from directly beneath the rig. Jake swallowed the lump in his throat and whispered, "Who's there?" The rhythmic knocking beneath the rig was relentless now, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Jake's pulse thudded in his ears as he sat frozen in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the cab floor, where the sound seemed to reverberate the strongest. Every nerve screamed at him that something was wrong, that the silence of the canyon was no ordinary stillness. Outside, the wind whispered softly, carrying an eerie undertone that seemed to blend with the knocks, turning them into a language he couldn't yet understand. Summoning his courage, Jake unlatched the door and climbed down carefully, flashlight in hand. The canyon shadows thickened around him, folding into themselves like living curtains. The truck loomed above, a giant metal beast hunched against the darkening sky. The knocks came again, tap, 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 this time slower, almost hesitant. Jake crouched and shone the beam beneath the trailer's chassis, his breath catching as the light flickered over something unexpected. A cluster of footprints pressed into the soft earth, larger than any animal's, but muddied and distorted, as if whoever made them had been dragging their feet. Nearby lay a small bundle of cloth, ragged and stained, tangled in some thorny brush. He reached toward the cloth, heart hammering. It was a tattered piece of fabric, frayed at the edges, the faded pattern impossible to place. A cold shudder rippled down his spine as the knocking suddenly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that swallowed the night sounds whole.
"Hello?" Jake called softly, voice trembling. "If you're out here, come on. I'm not going to hurt you." No answer, just the distant call of a lone hawk and the rustling of leaves stirred by the breeze. The shadows seemed to shift at the edge of his vision, tall, indistinct forms, slipping between trees, vanishing whenever he tried to focus. Jake stood, pressing a hand to his forehead to steady his racing thoughts. His mind flickered to stories he'd heard in truck stops, tales of lost travelers, of people hiding from something in the canyons, of whispers carried on the wind. He shook the thoughts away, but the fear was growing, creeping like cold water up his spine. He circled to the other side of the rig, shining his light into the undercarriage once more. The knocking resumed, tapping faster now, almost in a pattern, a rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded deliberate, communicative. "Is this some kind of joke?" Jake muttered, voice low. "If you're trying to scare me, it's working." He knelt, inspecting the ground beneath the wheels. The earth was soft and disturbed, as if something had been moving there recently. There was a faint trail of footprints leading away from the rig, toward the canyon's edge, then vanishing into the rocky outcroppings. Jake's flashlight caught a glimmer, a small rusted key, hanging from a wire wrapped around a jagged stone. He picked it up, the metal cold and rough, against his palm. His mind raced. Why was this here? Who had been beneath his rig? The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a low scraping sound, like nails dragging over metal. Jake froze, ears straining in the silence. To then, a faint voice whispered, barely audible, "Help, please." His breath caught. The voice was fragile, desperate. He called out again, louder this time. I'm here. Where are you? I'll help you. No response. Just the echo of his own voice bouncing off the canyon walls. Jake's chest tightened with a mix of fear and determination. He knew the terrain well enough to be cautious. These canyons were unforgiving, and many stories spoke of people lost forever among the rocks. But he couldn't ignore the plea. He pulled out his pocket knife, clicking it open, and edged closer to the place where the sound seemed strongest. Beneath the trailer's rear axles, to the ground sloped steeply there. Rocks piled in precarious heaps, gaps wide enough to hide a person, or worse. A sudden movement caught his eye. A flash of cloth, a hand reaching out from beneath a rusted metal beam. Jake dropped to his knees, shining his light into the shadowed crevice. Hey, hold on, I'm coming. The knocking grew frantic, tapping wildly, as if urging him faster. His heart pounded, adrenaline flooding his veins. He crawled under the rig, the dirt cold and rough against his skin. The space was cramped, filled with metal beams, wires, and dust motes dancing in his flashlight's beam. Deeper in the shadows, he glimpsed a figure, a man, young, gaunt, eyes wide with fear and relief. His clothes were torn and dirt-streaked, skin bruised from days spent hidden in the unforgiving canyon. I'm Jake, he whispered, voice hoarse. I'm here to help. The man coughed, clutching a broken wrist. Thank God, he breathed. I've been trapped for days. As Jake reached out to help him, a sudden loud crack echoed nearby. The sound of shifting rocks. The ground trembled slightly beneath them. We need to get out, now, the man urged, pain flickering across his face. Jake nodded, heart racing. He helped the man crawl out from beneath the rig, every muscle aching. The night around them felt charged, alive with an unseen presence, and the knocking beneath the truck had ceased, for now. But deep in the shadows of the canyon, something stirred, waiting silently for the next traveler to lose their way. The man Jake had pulled from beneath his rig was thin, almost skeletal, with a hollow look that spoke of days without proper food or rest. His clothes were tattered, soaked from what Jake assumed was a nearby creek, and his wrist was crudely bandaged with strips torn from his own shirt. But despite his weakened state, there was a fierce spark of survival in his eyes. Thank you, the man rasped, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how long I've been trapped under there, or how you even heard me. Jake shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. I heard knocking, like someone tapping. It didn't make sense at first, but I followed it. The man's gaze flickered toward the rig's undercarriage. I was hiding, trying to get away. Jake helped him to his feet, careful to steady him against the cold canyon rock. What were you running from? The man swallowed hard, eyes darting nervously to the shadows beyond the truck. Something, or someone. There's a story about this canyon. People disappear here, sometimes for days, sometimes forever. I thought I could sneak past. Jake nodded slowly. He'd heard murmurs of strange happenings in these parts, locals talking about ghosts, missing hikers, and things lurking in the rocks. But he'd never believed much in those tales. Until now. What's your name? Jake asked. Eli, the man said. I was driving through when my rig broke down. Like yours. I went to check the damage. But then, things started happening. I heard voices, footsteps, knocking. Jake rubbed his jaw. Knocking from beneath the truck. Eli nodded. Yeah, I hid under there, hoping to stay out of sight. But it wasn't just people. There's something else in this canyon. Jake's flashlight swept the canyon walls, the jagged rocks seeming to close in tighter, the wind whispering eerie calls. What do you mean? Something else? Eli shivered. I don't know exactly. Shadows that move on their own. Sounds that come from nowhere. The knocking. It's like a warning. Or maybe a trap. Jake looked back at his rig, the massive vehicle suddenly seeming less like a fortress and more like a prison. The night air was thick with tension, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. We need to get out of here, Jake said, voice firm,
despite the unease knotting his stomach. "Can you walk?" Eli grimaced but nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Together they climbed back into the cab, Jake starting the engine. It roared to life, but the rumble was uneven, the gauges flickering wildly. The road ahead was swallowed by fog, dense and creeping.
As they began moving slowly down the canyon road, the radio crackled to life with static, then a distorted voice. "You can't leave. The canyon keeps its own," Jake cursed, trying to tune it out, but the words echoed in his mind. Eli's grip tightened on the dashboard as the truck jolted, the road seeming to breathe beneath them once more. Suddenly, a figure darted into the headlights. A woman, pale and wild-eyed, dressed in ragged clothes. She vanished as quickly as she appeared, leaving behind only a chilling silence. Eli's face paled. "That's her, the one who's been stalking me, the reason I hid under your rig." Jake's heart pounded. "Who?" "The lost," Eli whispered. "Those who never made it out of this canyon. She's part of the canyon now, watching, waiting." The truck rumbled over uneven asphalt, the road twisting and turning, the fog thickening to an impenetrable wall. The canyon's ancient secrets pressed in, and Jake realized their fight to escape was only beginning. The truck's headlights pierced the thickening fog with little success, casting feeble beams that seemed swallowed almost instantly by the dense mist. Jake's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as the rig wobbled over patches of uneven pavement, the road beneath their tires pulsing with that same strange rhythmic breath that had unsettled him from the start. Eli sat tensely beside him, eyes wide and darting, his breathing shallow but steady, despite the exhaustion evident in his gaunt face. "We have to confront it," Eli whispered urgently, voice barely above the hum of the engine. "The canyon's not just a place, it's alive, it's hungry, and it won't let us leave unless we face what's beneath." Jake swallowed hard, glancing at the canyon walls looming like ancient sentinels beside the narrow road. The shadows between the rocks seemed deeper now, stretching and twisting with unnatural movement. He'd never believed in ghosts or curses, but this place was different. It was as if the earth itself held a secret it was desperate to protect. "What do you mean, face it?" Jake asked, voice tight. Eli's eyes reflected the pale glow of the dashboard. "Underneath the rig, where I was trapped, there's something living down there, a presence that binds the canyon and the road. It's a creature of shadow and stone, born from the pain and fear of those who vanished here." Jake shivered, the truck's frame vibrating beneath his hands, the knocking, the pulsing of the asphalt. It all made sense now, a warning and a hunger intertwined. He knew what he had to do. As the road curved sharply near a steep cliff, Eli pointed toward a narrow dirt path branching off into the trees. "This way, it's the only place you can reach the heart of the canyon, the source of the breath beneath the road." Jake slowed the rig and maneuvered carefully onto the path, the tires crunching over gravel and broken branches. The forest closed in, branches clawing at the sides of the truck, the fog swirling in thick tendrils that seemed to reach inside. The air grew colder, heavier, as if pressing down on his chest. They stopped near a crumbling stone outcrop, jagged and blackened as if scorched by ancient fire. The knocking resumed beneath the rig, soft at first, then growing into a rapid, insistent tapping. Jake's flashlight beam revealed strange carvings etched into the rocks, twisted symbols and spirals, worn by time but unmistakably deliberate. Eli climbed down and peered beneath the trailer's chassis. The earth here was loose, the ground trembling faintly underfoot. He reached in, fingers brushing against something cold and rough. "It's waiting," Eli murmured, "waiting for us to face it." Jake swallowed, then followed Eli out of the cab, the flashlight shaking in his hand. Together, they crouched beneath the rig, the knocking now a frantic rhythm echoing against metal and stone. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted violently. A crack snaked through the earth,
a deep gaping maw opening in the soil. From the darkness emerged a monstrous form, a swirling mass of shadow and rock, pulsating veins glowing faintly red beneath a crusted surface. Its presence was overwhelming, ancient and malevolent. Jake staggered back, heart hammering. The creature's voice echoed inside his mind, not spoken, but felt, a deep resonance vibrating with primal power. You trespass on sacred ground, you bear the weight of those who vanished. To leave you must pay the toll. Eli steadied himself, voice trembling but resolute. What toll? The creature's form pulsed, veins throbbing in time with the breath of the road. A sacrifice of memory, fear, or hope. Choose what you surrender, and the path will open. Jake's mind raced. The memories of his life flashed before him, the faces of his family, the dreams he'd chased, the hopes he'd held onto through years on the road. He looked at Eli, whose eyes held the same desperate question. I don't know if I have the strength, Jake whispered. Eli nodded slowly. We don't have a choice. Together, they stepped closer, the air thickening with energy. Jake closed his eyes, willing himself to let go, of fear, of regret, of the heavy burden of survival. The creature's pulsing grew steadier, the earth beneath their feet settling as if accepting the offering. The maw of shadow and stone began to close, the ancient presence retreating back into the depths. The road beneath their tires stilled, its breathing slowing to a gentle pulse. Jake and Eli climbed back into the cab, the first pale light of dawn filtering through the mist. The rig rumbled to life, engine steady and strong once more. As they drove away from the canyon's edge, the fog lifted, revealing a sky painted with morning hues. The road stretched out ahead, solid, silent, but forever changed. Neither man spoke for a long time, the weight of what they'd faced lingering like a shadow in the cab. And far beneath the surface, deep in the earth where light never reached, the canyon exhaled, waiting patiently for the next traveler who would dare to listen to the breath of the road. The sun had fully risen now, spilling warm golden light across the landscape, but for Jake Turner, the warmth was cold comfort. The rig rolled steadily along the highway, the engine humming with a reassuring steadiness that seemed almost foreign after the night's horrors. Yet despite the comforting noise and the clear sky, a gnawing unease settled deep in his gut, a lingering echo of the canyon's shadow that refused to fade.
Jake glanced over at Eli, who sat silently in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the passing scenery. The man looked both relieved and haunted, as if a part of him had been left behind in that strange, breathing darkness beneath their rig. Think we're really out of it? Jake asked, voice low. Eli shook his head slowly. Out? No. We escaped, yes. But the canyon, it stays with you. It doesn't just let people go. Jake's eyes narrowed, watching the road ahead, but the memory of the creature's pulsing form and cryptic demand clung stubbornly to his mind. The toll they'd paid, whatever that truly meant, felt like a shadow cast over their souls. Hours passed, the miles slipping beneath their wheels as the landscape changed from rocky cliffs to gentle rolling hills. But the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and questions. Eventually, Jake pulled off at a small roadside diner. The neon sign flickered erratically, but inside the air was thick with the smell of coffee and fried food, a stark contrast to the cold, eerie silence of the canyon. They slid into a booth near the window, the warm chatter of patrons, a balm for their frayed nerves. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out the rusted key he'd found beneath the rig. He placed it on the table, fingers tracing its cold metal surface. What do you think this is for? He asked Eli. Eli studied it thoughtfully. Maybe it's a token, a reminder of what we left behind, or what the canyon keeps. Their conversation was interrupted by an older man sitting nearby, who had been listening quietly. His weathered face held lines carved by years on the road, and his eyes sparkled with knowing.
"You boys look like you've seen the worst of that canyon," he said, voice gravelly but kind. "It's taken more than a few rigs and drivers over the years. Some say it's cursed, others say it's alive, like it breathes under the asphalt, waiting for its next victim." Jake nodded slowly, the stories he'd dismissed now all too real. "We saw something beneath the road. It spoke to us." The man leaned in, lowering his voice. "You're lucky to be alive. Most who hear the knocking don't get to tell the tale. But if you're heading back that way, remember this: the canyon wants a toll paid, and it doesn't forget." Jake and Eli exchanged a glance, the weight of the warning sinking in. Later, back on the highway, Jake caught sight of the canyon in the distance, its cliffs glowing softly in the afternoon sun. For a moment, the shadows seemed to move, shapes flickering at the edges of vision. His heart quickened, but he kept his eyes forward, gripping the wheel tightly. He thought about the lost travelers, the shadows beneath the rig, the living road that had tried to claim them. The toll they'd paid might have been enough to escape, but he knew the canyon's breath was eternal, waiting, watching, always hungry. As night began to fall again, the highway ahead disappeared into creeping fog. A faint tapping sounded beneath the rig, soft, steady, familiar. Jake swallowed hard, exhaling slowly, as the rig's headlights cut into the mist once more. The road was still breathing, and it was waiting.
He woke to the soft hum of the engine idling beneath him. But something was wrong. The usual rumble of tires on asphalt was absent. Instead, there was only stillness. Ryan blinked slowly, his eyelids heavy from too few hours of restless sleep on the long haul. His hands lay on the steering wheel, stiff and cold, fingers twitching as if trying to remember a forgotten motion. Outside the windshield, the world was unfamiliar. Ryan sat upright, heart quickening. The soft gray light filtered through thick trees, but these weren't the familiar pines of the mountain passes he'd driven last week. The forest pressed close, dense and tangled, with twisted branches clawing at the sky. There was no road visible, only patches of damp earth and thick moss stretching into shadow. He reached for the GPS unit, mounted to the dash, and flicked it on. The screen blinked, sputtered, and then displayed an error. No signal, location unknown. He tapped it again, hoping for a reset, but the device remained stubbornly blank. Ryan's phone fared no better. He pulled it from his pocket and stared at the blank screen. No bars, no reception, no help. A chill crawled up his spine. He glanced down at the gear shift. The truck was in park, engine still running. He reached for the ignition to try restarting, but the engine stuttered and died. He tried again. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered once and went dark. Panic tightened his throat. "Okay," he muttered to himself, voice shaky but determined. "Let's figure this out." He grabbed his flashlight from the passenger seat and pushed open the door. A rush of damp, cold air greeted him, smelling of earth and decay. The ground beneath his boots was soft, covered in fallen leaves and pine needles. No sign of gravel or asphalt. His rig sat surrounded by the wild undergrowth, as if it had been abandoned in the heart of a forgotten forest. Ryan circled the truck slowly, shining his flashlight into the gloom. There were no tire tracks leading to this spot, no sign that any vehicle had passed recently. The trees leaned close, trunks gnarled and twisting, blocking the view beyond a few feet. Somewhere distant, a bird called, a harsh, unfamiliar cry that sent a shiver down his spine. He tried calling out, voice echoing awkwardly between the trunks. "Hello, anyone there?" Only the silent forest answered. His thoughts raced. He'd been driving all night, heading toward the next town after a quick delivery. How had he ended up here?
He remembered no sudden turns, no wrong exits. The last thing he recalled was feeling tired, deciding to pull over and rest for a bit. But where was here? The sunlight filtered weakly through the canopy, but it seemed dimmer than it should be, almost as if the forest absorbed the light itself. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange electricity that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Ryan moved back toward the cab, checking the truck's tires for damage. All seemed intact, no signs of puncture or deflation. The rig's exterior was coated with a thin layer of dew and dirt, but otherwise looked untouched. He climbed back inside, closing the door behind him. The interior felt claustrophobic, the silence pressing on him like a weight. He flicked on the dome light. The small space was cluttered with maps, empty coffee cups, and a faded photograph taped to the dashboard. A smiling woman, a small child, his family. A pang of homesickness hit him unexpectedly. He pressed the radio button, hoping for a connection. The static crackled, but no voices came through. The fog outside thickened again, blurring the edges of the windshield. "Where am I?" he whispered, the question hanging in the still air. With no answers, and no signal, Ryan realized he was utterly alone, parked in a place that wasn't on any map, and maybe not meant to be found at all. The heavy silence inside the cab weighed on Ryan's chest, like a physical force. He sat motionless for several minutes, eyes fixed on the dense forest outside, trying to piece together how he could have ended up in such an unfamiliar place. The trees pressed in tight, their twisted branches forming tangled shadows that flickered with the weak light filtering through the gray sky. No sign of the road he'd been driving on, no sign of civilization, just an endless, suffocating wilderness. He tried the engine again, a sputter, a cough, but nothing more. The rig refused to start. His hands trembled as he reached for the phone once more, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. No bars, no signal, no hope. Swallowing down rising panic, Ryan grabbed the flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The cold air bit at his skin, sharp and damp. He shone the beam around, sweeping over the moss-covered ground and dense underbrush. The forest was unnervingly quiet, save for the occasional snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. Determined to find some clue, he set off cautiously into the woods. The soft earth muffled his footsteps, and thick roots twisted beneath the moss, making the footing treacherous. As he moved deeper, the landscape grew stranger. Trees bent in unnatural angles, their bark scarred with deep grooves, and strange symbols carved into the wood. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old blood mixed with the earth. Minutes turned into hours as Ryan wandered, calling out now and then, but only silence answered. His flashlight caught glimmers of strange objects hidden in the shadows. A broken lantern, a weathered shoe, fragments of torn fabric tangled in brambles. It was as if others had been here before him, lost, wandering, forgotten. A sudden movement caught his eye. He spun, shining the light toward the sound, but saw only shifting shadows. His heart raced, adrenaline flooding his veins. He was not alone. A low, distant whisper seemed to rise from the forest floor, a soft susurration of voices just beyond comprehension. The fog thickened around him, wrapping the woods in a cold, clammy embrace. Time lost meaning. His watch had stopped hours ago, the hands frozen at 1:15 midnight. Fear gnawed at him as the sun failed to rise, the dim light never changing. The world felt trapped in a twilight limbo, a place outside of time. Ryan realized with growing dread that the forest wasn't just unfamiliar, it was unnatural.
He stumbled upon a clearing. In the center lay a small campfire ringed with stones, long cold, surrounded by scattered belongings, a battered backpack, a rusted knife, a torn notebook. Ryan picked up the notebook carefully, the pages brittle and stained with age. Scrawled inside were desperate notes, fragmented messages warning of the place's curse, tales of travelers who had vanished, caught in a never-ending maze.
The final entry chilled him. The place shifts. It feeds on us. Don't follow the lights. Don't trust your own voice. A flicker of movement caught his eye again. He spun to face it, heart pounding, but saw only a faint glow dancing through the mist, like will-o'-the-wisps, teasing him deeper into the unknown. Ryan's breath came in ragged gasps as the fog closed in tighter, the shadows thickening into shapes half seen. The woods whispered, calling his name, echoing with the voices of those lost before. Alone, trapped, and surrounded by the impossible, Ryan understood he had entered a place not marked on any map, a place that refused to let him leave. The deeper Ryan ventured, the more the forest seemed to warp around him, twisting his perception until nothing felt solid or true. The trees, once familiar in their towering, stoic presence, now appeared contorted, branches bending at impossible angles, bark writhing like skin beneath his flashlight's beam. Shadows stretched and recoiled unpredictably, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat syncing with his own. His breaths came faster, misting in the cold air, mingling with the dense fog that refused to lift. The watch on his wrist had stopped hours ago, its hands frozen at an unchanging moment, as if time itself had been suspended here. The sky, a dull grey dome overhead, offered no clue whether day or night prevailed. A sudden rustling nearby snapped him from his thoughts. Ryan swung his flashlight wildly, but the beam landed on empty underbrush. Yet, in the distance, faint shapes shifted, elongated figures that seemed to glide rather than walk. Each time he blinked, they vanished, leaving only the whisper of footsteps that didn't match his own. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, each beat echoing through his limbs. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "This isn't real," he whispered to himself. "It has to be something in my mind." But the evidence contradicted his hope. The torn pages of a journal lay half buried beneath a twisted root, damp and smeared with dark stains that could only be old blood. The words, barely legible, told a story of travelers lost to the forest, their memories unraveling, trapped in an endless loop of wandering and forgetting. Ryan bent down to examine the pages, tracing the faded ink. The entries grew increasingly frantic, names scratched out, dates circling endlessly, pleas for rescue that dissolved into incoherent scribbles. One chilling sentence repeated like a mantra: "Don't trust the voices. They sound like you." A shiver ran through Ryan as he looked up, hearing a faint whisper carried on the fog, a voice calling his name in tones eerily like his own. His skin crawled as the sound circled him, drawing closer and retreating like a predator stalking its prey. He spun, shining his flashlight into the fog, searching for the source. Nothing but shifting mist and the skeletal silhouettes of trees. "Who's there?" His voice was shaky, barely carrying beyond his immediate space. No answer, only the cold, oppressive silence pressing back. He reached for his phone, hoping for a signal to call for help, but the screen remained dark and unresponsive. Frustration and fear warred within him. He dropped the device onto the forest floor. It bounced once and skidded away, swallowed by leaves and shadows. The fog thickened around him, enveloping his body in a cold embrace. Shapes flickered at the edges of his vision, faces distorted, eyes hollow, mouths moving without sound. He blinked rapidly, but the images persisted, etched into his mind. A sudden chill blew through the clearing, and the earth seemed to pulse beneath his feet. The forest whispered, voices rising in a chorus of sorrow and warning. Ryan's knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, heart racing, mind fracturing. He realized with growing terror that the forest was alive, its breath mingling with the fog, feeding on the lost and the frightened. Here, time twisted and memory slipped away, like water through fingers. Each step forward was a step deeper into the labyrinth of shadows and whispers. His own voice joined the chorus, calling out in desperation and confusion, "Help me, please."
But the answer was only silence, and the haunting echo of his own name fading into the endless fog. The fog thickened like a living shroud as Ryan struggled to rise, the cold earth biting into his palms. Every breath felt heavy, weighed down by the oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. The voices that had whispered moments ago now swirled around him in a cacophony of echoes, some pleading, some warning, others filled with grief. They were the ghosts of this place, trapped souls tethered to the forest's endless grasp. Ryan's mind raced, desperate to find meaning in the chaos. Fragments of memory surfaced, snatches of old legends spoken in hushed tones at roadside diners, stories of travelers vanishing in remote woods, caught in supernatural traps or alternate dimensions. Could this place be one of those cursed spots, a pocket outside reality, where time and space warped like ripples on a pond? Summoning his remaining strength, Ryan forced himself to his feet and pressed on, flashlight piercing the thick haze. The trees ahead seemed to lean closer, their twisted limbs forming grotesque arches that beckoned and barred passage simultaneously. Strange symbols carved deep into bark glowed faintly, their meanings indecipherable yet charged with power. A sudden movement caught his eye, a flicker of a figure stepping into the clearing. It was tall and cloaked in shadows, features obscured beneath a hood. The figure's presence sent a shiver through Ryan's spine. It did not speak but gestured silently toward a narrow path winding deeper into the forest. Heart pounding, Ryan hesitated. The path promised either salvation or deeper peril. The figure's eyes glowed faintly beneath a hood, a mixture of sorrow and warning.
He took a cautious step forward. The forest seemed to exhale, and the path ahead shimmered, revealing glimpses of places both familiar and alien. A broken cabin shrouded in mist, a flickering lantern hanging from a twisted branch, shadows dancing on distant rocks. Memories flooded Ryan's mind, faces of lost travelers, their desperate eyes, their pleas etched into the fabric of the forest itself. He realized this place was not merely a prison, but a reflection of the souls trapped within, shaped by their fears, regrets, and hopes. As he ventured deeper, the forest shifted around him, paths twisted back on themselves, trees rearranged, and time fractured, moments stretched and contracted unpredictably. Ryan's own footsteps echoed in impossible places, sometimes before he took them, sometimes after. The cloaked figure reappeared beside him, silent and steady. It extended a pale hand, revealing an ancient weathered key entwined with vines and roots. Without words, the figure conveyed a choice: use the key to unlock the path home, but at a cost, or remain and become part of the forest's eternal tapestry. Another whisper in the fog. Ryan's mind reeled. The key was a symbol, a price demanded by the forest for escape. He thought of his family, his life outside these haunting woods. He thought of the freedom waiting beyond the fog. With trembling hands, he took the key. The forest responded, a gentle pulse of light, guiding him toward a rusted gate hidden among the trees. As he approached, the fog thinned, revealing a narrow trail leading upward toward the fading light. But the forest's breath grew heavy, and the whispers swelled, a reminder that choices here were never simple, and freedom came at a price. Ryan stepped through the gate, heart racing, and began the climb toward the world he knew, carrying with him the weight of the forest's secrets and the echoes of those lost before. The trail under Ryan's feet was rough and steep, but with the ancient key clenched tightly in his hand, a fragile thread of hope pulled him onward. The fog thinned as he climbed, the heavy silence giving way to the distant hum of life, birds calling, leaves rustling in a gentle breeze, the faint scent of pine and fresh earth. For the first time in what felt like days, he sensed the world beyond the forest's grasp. His lungs burned with each breath, legs aching, but the promise of escape pushed him higher. As the sun rose, pale light filtered through the thinning canopy, dappling the forest floor with golden hues. The nightmare he had been trapped in seemed to retreat with the fog,
the shadows shrinking back into the cracks and crevices from which they had emerged. At the crest of the ridge, Ryan found the rusted iron gate the cloaked figure had spoken of, half hidden beneath twisting vines and moss. The key fit smoothly into the lock, the mechanism groaning as the ancient seal gave way. With a deep breath, he pushed the gate open, the hinges creaking in protest. Beyond lay a narrow path that wound down the mountainside toward a familiar highway, the sound of distant engines reaching his ears. He hurried down, heart pounding, the forest's grip loosening with each step. But as he neared the edge, the forest's breath whispered one final warning, carried on the wind. Remember, the forest never forgets. Ryan glanced back toward the shadows among the trees. For a fleeting moment, he saw faces, ghostly and sorrowful, watching silently, their eyes filled with longing and sorrow. He felt the weight of countless lost souls, trapped forever in the labyrinth of mist and memory. He emerged onto the highway, just as the first cars streaked past, the world alive with movement and sound. His rig sat parked at the roadside, its engine now quiet, still bearing the faint trace of dew and moss from the forest. Ryan climbed inside, hands trembling as he started the engine. The familiar roar filled the cab, steady and reassuring. As he pulled back onto the road, the landscape transformed. The forest receded behind him, replaced by rolling fields bathed in morning light. But the key remained heavy in his pocket, a reminder of the price paid and the secrets carried from the place that was nowhere on any map. As the miles slipped away beneath his wheels, Ryan realized that though he had escaped the forest's physical grasp, a part of it would remain with him forever. The whispers would haunt his dreams, the shifting shadows would linger at the edges of his vision. He had crossed into something beyond the ordinary, a world where reality bent and the lost waited. And somewhere deep in that forgotten forest, the fog thickened once more, breathing softly, patient and eternal, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way.
The sun was dipping low behind the hills, casting long orange shadows across the stretch of highway where Mark Reynolds cruised his pickup truck. It was late afternoon, the kind of golden hour light that softened the edges of the world and made even the most mundane scenes feel almost nostalgic. Mark had been driving for hours, hauling supplies to a nearby town, when he spotted her standing by the roadside, a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in simple, slightly outdated clothes, thumb extended in a quiet plea for a ride. Mark pulled over without hesitation. The woman smiled softly, climbed into the passenger seat, and thanked him with a gentle nod. Her eyes held something wistful, a faraway look that tugged at Mark's curiosity. She introduced herself as Emily and explained she needed a ride to her childhood home, a place she hadn't seen in decades. As they merged back onto the highway, Emily began to talk, her voice calm, tinged with a sweetness that made her stories feel like treasured memories. She spoke of the house nestled at the edge of a small town, a white clapboard with a porch swing, where she used to sit for hours watching the seasons change. She recounted the backyard where she and her siblings had chased fireflies, and the old oak tree they carved their initials into every summer. Mark listened, drawn into the gentle cadence of her words, the vivid pictures she painted, the way she described the neighborhood, the neighbors' names, even the scent of lilacs in the spring. It all felt incredibly real. He found himself smiling, transported to a simpler time through her eyes. Yet, beneath the warmth of her stories, Mark sensed something unusual. Emily's clothes had a timeless quality, as if they belonged to a past era. Her speech lacked the hurried slang, or references common to someone living in the present day. Occasionally, she hesitated as if searching for words long forgotten, and her hands sometimes trembled ever so slightly when she spoke of the house, The highway wound through rolling fields and thick forests. As they neared the town, Mark glanced at the GPS, noting their approach to what should have been Emily's old neighborhood. But as they entered the outskirts, something felt off. The streets were empty, houses boarded up or overgrown with weeds. The vibrant community Emily described was nowhere to be seen. He slowed the truck and pulled up alongside a weathered wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Millbrook." The paint was faded and peeling, the name barely legible. Emily's eyes filled with a strange mix of sorrow and longing as she stared past the window. "I remember Millbrook like it was yesterday," she murmured, voice softening. "But it's changed so much. Or maybe it's been gone too long." Mark's brow furrowed. "It looks abandoned." Emily nodded slowly. "There was a fire, a terrible fire, 40 years ago." Mark stared at her, disbelief creeping in. 40 years. Emily's gaze met his, steady but distant. "Yes, the house I asked to be taken to. It burned down in that fire. Everyone thought I was gone too." The truck sat silent for a moment, as Mark processed her words. The woman beside him, recounting vivid memories, was speaking of a home destroyed long before either of them was born. The house she longed for was nothing but ashes now. A sudden chill brushed through the cab despite the warm afternoon air. Mark shivered and glanced around, noticing how the light seemed dimmer here, the shadows deeper. Emily looked out the window, eyes misty. "I came back to see if I could find anything left. To say goodbye." Mark's mind reeled with questions, but before he could speak, a faint flicker caught his eye, a brief movement near the edge of the woods bordering the road. He blinked, but it was gone. "Did you see that?" he asked cautiously. Emily shook her head, voice barely audible. "Sometimes I think I still see them. The people who were lost in the fire, the memories that never left." The truck rolled forward slowly, the air thick with an unspoken weight. As the sun dipped lower, casting long haunting shadows across the empty streets, Mark realized that this ride was no ordinary journey. Emily's story was tied to a tragedy that lingered in the very bones of the town, a sorrow etched into the charred remains and whispered in the wind. And as the road stretched ahead, winding deeper into the forgotten past, Mark wondered just how far he was willing to follow a ghost's path home. The truck rolled slowly through the ghost town of Millbrook, the fading sunlight casting long shadows over cracked pavement and empty lots. Mark's eyes flicked repeatedly between the road and Emily's pale face, which had grown softer, almost translucent, as she stared out the window. The house she had spoken of, the one that had burned down 4 decades ago, was nowhere in sight, replaced by a vacant lot where weeds had taken root and memories had seemingly vanished. Mark's curiosity gnawed at him. He pulled the truck over near the edge of town, where a rusted sign marked Old Millbrook Cemetery. The air was thick with a heavy stillness, and a low breeze stirred dry leaves across the cracked stones. "Want to get out for a bit?" Mark offered, voice cautious. Emily nodded, stepping down from the cab with a delicate grace. She moved slowly, as if weighed down by invisible chains. Her eyes scanned the rows of weathered headstones, lips moving silently in a prayer or a memory. Mark followed her, flashlight in hand now as the evening deepened. He shone the beam over the tombstones, each name worn smooth by years of rain and wind. A chill crept over him as he noticed how many graves bore dates clustered around the same decade, the early 1980s, the time of the fire Emily had mentioned. "Were your family here?" Mark asked softly.
Emily's gaze lingered on a small, unassuming grave marked only by a simple cross. "Yes, my parents, my brother." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her chest. "We never left, really." As they walked back toward the truck, Mark's phone buzzed briefly. He fumbled to check it, hope rising, but the screen simply displayed no service. He sighed, slipping the device back into his pocket. "Let's see if anyone around here knows anything about the fire, he suggested. Maybe someone left records, or can tell us more. They drove toward what had once been the town center. Shops and homes were nothing but shells now. Charred timber, collapsed roofs, windows shattered by time. An old diner's faded sign creaked in the wind. The letters barely legible. Millbrook Cafe. Mark pulled up near the abandoned building. As he stepped out, a sudden movement caught his eye. A flicker near the tree line. He turned sharply, but saw nothing except the creeping fog rolling in. Inside the diner, dust hung thick in the stale air. The booths were torn, the counter coated in years of neglect. On the wall hung a faded newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. Mark carefully peeled it from the frame, reading aloud. Tragic fire devastates Millbrook. 17 dead, 5 missing, cause unknown. Emily's eyes filled with tears. That's the night everything changed. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed, a faint tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. Mark spun toward the noise, flashlight beams slicing through shadows. Nothing. Did you hear that? He asked, voice low. Emily nodded. Sometimes the past speaks through the silence. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying a faint melody, an old lullaby Emily's mother had sung. She whispered. The air grew colder, and the shadows lengthened, pressing close, as if the town itself breathed a mournful sigh. Mark felt a presence nearby, unseen but palpable. He glanced toward the window, and caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure standing just beyond the glass. A woman in a simple dress, face turned away, hair flowing in the breeze. Who was that? He asked, stepping outside, but the figure had vanished into the mist, leaving only the chill and the echo of whispered names. Emily's voice trembled. She's been waiting. Mark swallowed hard, realizing that the tragedy of Millbrook was not just history. It was alive, woven into the very fabric of the place. And the woman beside him was not simply seeking a ride home, but searching for something lost to time, trapped between memory and shadow. As night descended, the empty streets seemed to pulse with unseen life, and Mark wondered how long the flames of the past would continue to burn. The deeper night wrapped itself around Millbrook, the more the town seemed to pulse with a strange, lingering energy. Ryan stood beside his truck, the cold creeping through his jacket, as the fog thickened again, swirling like restless spirits, weaving between the skeletal remains of buildings and scorched trees. The faded newspaper clipping in his hand felt heavy, as if the words on the brittle page were imbued with a sorrow that seeped into his bones. Emily stood nearby, her eyes reflecting the flickering amber glow of a lone street lamp, struggling to stay lit against the rising darkness. Her voice was low and trembling, as she began to recount memories no one else alive could confirm. A tragic night etched in time, but lost to most. That fire, she whispered, eyes distant. It started in the old mill. Flames spread faster than anyone could stop. My family, we tried to escape, but the smoke was everywhere. The roads were blocked. People vanished in the chaos. She swallowed hard. No one knew what really happened. Ryan listened, captivated and unsettled. The details she spoke of, the blocked exits, the strange disappearances, the smoke that smelled of something not quite natural, were unlike anything recorded in official reports. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the street, rattling broken window panes and sending loose debris skittering across the cracked pavement. From the shadows, a faint sound emerged, soft footsteps on dry leaves. A sigh carried on the breeze. Ryan's heart quickened. He shone his flashlight into the darkness, but found only shifting fog and twisted silhouettes. Then came the whispers, barely audible at first, threads of voices murmuring names, snatches of conversations, cries for help. They seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the ruins themselves. Ryan's skin prickled with unease. Emily shivered. They're still here, those who never left, the ones who were trapped in the fire, or worse. Her voice broke. I can feel them sometimes, watching, waiting. A sudden flicker caught Ryan's eye, movement at the edge of the light, a shadow that twisted unnaturally,
before dissolving into the mist. He turned toward Emily, whose pale face was etched with fear. "Did you see that?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "It's her, the woman who lost everything that night. She appears sometimes calling, searching for peace." Ryan's gaze drifted to the corner of the street, where a faint figure began to materialize, translucent and glowing faintly. A woman in a simple dress, hair flowing like smoke, eyes filled with infinite sadness. She reached out toward the darkness, lips moving in silent lament. The apparition's presence chilled the air, and the whispers swelled into a haunting chorus, voices blending in sorrowful harmony. Ryan felt the weight of countless stories, grief, regret, love lost, woven into the fabric of this haunted place. As the spectral figure faded into the night, Emily spoke softly. "The past never truly dies here. It lingers in the flames, in the ashes, in the hearts of those who remember." Ryan looked around the desolate town, realizing that the house she sought was more than just a physical place. It was a nexus of memory and loss, a portal where the living and the dead converged. The night deepened, and the fog thickened once more, swallowing the ruins and the whispers alike. Ryan felt the pull of the unseen, a gentle but unrelenting tug drawing him closer to the mysteries buried beneath the scorched earth. He knew that the journey was far from over, that some secrets were bound to the flames, waiting patiently for those willing to listen.
The chill in the air deepened as Ryan and Emily stood amid the ruins, the fading light giving way to shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The spectral woman's fading presence lingered like a whisper on the breeze, a sorrow that clung to the broken timbers and cracked pavement of Millbrook. The air smelled faintly of smoke, and something more ancient, something that had settled into the earth itself, like a wound that refused to heal. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke. "She's not just a ghost. She's part of the fire's memory, the pain, the loss, trapped between what was and what could never be again." Ryan's mind reeled, the weight of the place pressing down on him. Is there a way to help her, to help all of them? Emily looked toward the twisted remains of what once had been her childhood home. "There's a way, but it's dangerous. To free them, to let them go, someone has to face the fire again, to walk through the ashes where the past still burns." Ryan swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the ruins. "What do I need to do?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small weathered locket. Opening it, she revealed a faded photograph of a smiling family, the same woman Ryan had glimpsed, surrounded by her loved ones before the fire. This belonged to her mother. It's a key, in a way, a connection. The wind stirred, carrying soft voices that seemed to beckon them toward the heart of the ruins. The trees swayed as if in response, shadows lengthening and twisting into shapes that resembled flames licking at the edges of reality. Ryan took a deep breath and followed Emily down a narrow path, winding through the wreckage. The ground was uneven, scattered with charred wood and shattered glass, and the air grew warmer, tinged with the faint scent of smoke and old ash. As they approached the center of the destruction, the temperature dropped suddenly, a cold wave rolling over them like a breath from another world. There, amid the blackened stones, stood a circle of scorched earth. In its center, the faint glow of embers pulsed softly, alive, breathing. The fire was both gone and not gone, a living memory etched into the soil. Emily knelt beside the glowing embers, placing the locket gently on the ground. This is where it all began, and where it must end. She turned to Ryan, her eyes shining with determination. You have to walk through it, to face the fire's truth, and carry their memories with you. Only then can the spirits be freed. Ryan hesitated, fear and doubt crashing over him, but he saw the hope in Emily's gaze, and the silent pleas of the ruins around them. He nodded slowly. With steady hands, he removed his jacket and shoes, stepping barefoot onto the warm glowing earth. The heat was gentle but insistent, seeping into his skin, filling him with memories not his own.
laughter and screams, love and loss, the final moments before the flames swallowed everything. Visions overwhelmed him, children running through smoke-filled rooms, parents searching desperately, the crackling blaze consuming walls and dreams. He saw the woman in the simple dress reaching out for help, the faces of those lost forever trapped in time. Pain surged through him as he walked the circle, carrying the weight of a tragedy that spanned decades. But with each step, the fire's grip loosened, its sorrow transforming into a soft glowing light that rose from the earth. When he stepped off the embers, the warmth remained, not in the ground, but inside him. The fog began to lift, the shadows receding as dawn broke over the horizon. The ruins of Millbrook seemed to breathe a quiet sigh, the echoes of the past finally finding peace. Emily smiled through tears, her figure growing faint in the morning light. "Thank you, you've given them freedom." Ryan watched as she faded into the soft glow of day, the locket warm in his hand. He knew the road ahead was uncertain, but the weight of the town's sorrow had lifted for now. As he climbed back into his rig, the radio crackled softly, a gentle voice whispering on the wind, "Remember us." The engine roared to life, steady and strong, as Ryan pulled onto the highway, carrying with him the memory of a home lost but never forgotten. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, bathing the ruins of Millbrook in a soft golden light that seemed almost surreal after the long haunting night. Ryan sat behind the wheel of his rig, the warmth of the morning sun filtering through the windshield, casting gentle patterns on the dashboard. The air inside the cab felt lighter, as if the weight of the past had finally begun to lift. Yet, despite the calm exterior, Ryan's mind was restless, tangled with the memories and emotions stirred by the night's journey. The locket from Emily rested heavy in his palm, a small, simple piece that somehow carried the echoes of an entire town's sorrow. He turned it over slowly, tracing the delicate engraving, and felt the lingering warmth of the embers that had once consumed the childhood home. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the fading silhouette of the woman who had vanished at dawn. Instead, the road behind was empty, bathed in the soft light of morning mist. The forest stood silent, as if holding its breath, the shadows of the past retreating into the folds of time. Ryan exhaled slowly, the knot of tension loosening in his chest. He had helped release something trapped, something heavy and ancient, but he knew the scars of Millbrook's tragedy would never fully fade from the earth, from the memories of those who had lived and lost, and from the whispers that still danced in the wind. As he started the rig and pulled back onto the highway, the radio crackled to life, a faint crackling static at first, then a soft voice, barely audible. "Thank you." The words lingered in the air, a gentle echo that seemed both a blessing and a farewell. The miles slipped beneath his tires, the landscape changing from the scarred remains of a forgotten town to the rolling hills and open fields of the wider world. The road stretched ahead, open and inviting, yet Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that some part of Millbrook traveled with him, a silent companion woven into the rhythm of his journey.